The Nevada sun was ruthless that morning, hanging heavy over the desert, like a judgment that never faded. At the edge of an old Marine training range, a single figure stood alone, a gray-haired man in a worn-out field jacket, boots polished out of habit, not pride. That was Frank Hayes, former Marine sniper, retired 35 years ago. He came to this range once a month, not for nostalgia, but because silence here still obeyed him. His rifle, a vintage M40, lay across the sandbag like an old friend who understood every unspoken thought. He exhaled, looked through the scope, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the desert, echoing into the emptiness. But what happened next wasn't the echo. It was the sound that didn't belong. A faint metallic hum answered from somewhere behind the dunes. Then, a flash of movement, a drone, half buried in dust, jerked to life like something awakening from a long sleep. Frank frowned. He hadn't seen a drone like that in decades. It wasn't modern. It looked older. He approached slowly, the desert crunching under his boots. The paint was chipped, the markings half gone. But one emblem was still visible under the grime. USMC Omega-4. His pulse froze. That program wasn't supposed to exist anymore. It was erased, burned, buried, along with everyone who ever touched it. He knelt beside the machine, running his hand over the rusted hull. There was a hole through its casing, right where his bullet had struck. And as he looked closer, a red light blinked twice. Then the hum stopped. In that silence, a memory returned. 1969, the jungles of Laos, his radio whispering the call sign Omega through static. And for the first time in years, Frank felt that same sinking weight in his chest, the one that told him he'd just stepped back into a war that never ended. 2 days later, Frank stood in front of a government building that looked more like a bunker than an office. A black SUV had arrived at his small house in Reno that morning, without warning, carrying a single envelope stamped Department of Defense, Priority Clearance. Inside was one line: Report to Nellis Air Force Base. Bring nothing. You've been cleared under Omega Protocol. He hadn't seen that word, Omega, in over 50 years. He thought it had died along with his unit. Now, walking through the corridors of the base, Frank noticed something strange. Young Marines saluting him without knowing why. The uniform might have been gone, but the air of command never really left. A door opened with a hiss. Inside sat General Bennett, tall, sharp, and with that same cold authority that made every man in the room stand straighter. On the wall behind him, a map of the Nevada desert glowed faintly. The old training zones from the 70s, one of them marked in red, Omega-4. Frank Hayes, the general began. You're probably wondering why we dug up a relic like you. Frank didn't flinch. You don't wake up ghosts unless you're scared of something, General. Bennett smirked. Fair. We intercepted a signal from the old Omega network, an encrypted beacon only your unit could have activated. He pointed at the map. It came from here, a decommissioned range outside Tonopah. The coordinates match your last classified mission. The problem is, that base doesn't exist anymore, officially. Frank crossed his arms. So, what do you need? My memory or my trigger finger? Both, the general replied. You're the only one who can find that signal. We sent 3 teams and none came back. That silence lingered, heavy as the desert heat. Frank sighed. Then you already know what that means. Whoever's using that signal was part of Omega. Bennett leaned forward. And if they're alive, Sergeant Hayes, they've been hiding for 50 years. Frank turned toward the door, jaw tight. Then it's time to wake them up. Outside, as the wind picked up across the tarmac, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. The hum of unfinished duty, the kind that followed a Marine long after the medals stopped shining, The road to Tonopah was the same as Frank remembered. Long, empty, and humming with the kind of silence that made you hear your own thoughts louder than you'd like. He drove an old Chevy pickup that smelled faintly of gun oil and sand. In the passenger seat, a single worn-out file folder rested beside him. Omega 4, terminated 1971, stamped across the cover. The military had given him a young tech specialist to assist him, Jason Walker, barely 30, full of caffeine and confidence. Jason adjusted his headset, watching data flicker across his tablet. "You sure you know where we're going, sir?" Frank kept his eyes on the horizon. "Son, when you've buried ghosts in the desert once, you never forget where they lie." By sunset, they reached what looked like nothing, a field of rock and wind, broken only by the jagged remains of an old watchtower. The air shimmered with heat and something else, a faint pulse that made Jason's device blink. "There," Jason said. "It's active, low-frequency analog. No satellite signal could survive that long." Frank knelt, brushing away dust until a piece of metal revealed itself, smooth, circular, and stamped with the old insignia. United States Marine Corps, Project Omega. He ran his hand over the mark, the same way you'd touch the name of a friend on a memorial wall. Jason's voice cut through the wind. "Sir, this isn't just a transmitter. It's connected to something underground." Frank stood. "Then we dig." An hour later, they uncovered a steel hatch buried beneath decades of sand. Rusted, but intact. Jason wiped his forehead. "There's no power. Whatever's down there is dead." Frank gave him a look, the kind that came from years of surviving what everyone else called impossible. "Dead things don't send signals, kid." With a grunt, he forced the hatch open. A rush of stale air escaped, carrying with it the scent of oil, dust, and something older, memory. A narrow staircase led into darkness, where a faint, rhythmic beeping echoed, steady as a heartbeat. Frank descended first, flashlight cutting through the gloom. The walls were lined with old equipment, radar panels, tape reels, and rusted lockers with names he recognized. At the far end of the corridor, a screen flickered to life, static, then a line of green text appearing like a ghost crawling out of the dark. "Hawk 8, system reactivated." Jason's eyes widened. "That's your call sign." Frank didn't answer. He stared at the screen as another line appeared. "Welcome back." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The desert above was silent, but beneath the surface, Omega was waking up. The bunker's air felt alive, humming like the inside of a sleeping machine, waiting for orders that never came. Frank moved deeper, his flashlight beam cutting across faded marine insignias and fragments of old mission logs etched into steel plates. Jason followed, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir, these systems predate my father. Who built all this?" Frank brushed his fingers along a row of lockers. Each name burned into his memory. Stevens, Mallory, Cruz, Thompson. Men who were part of his unit. Men who were supposed to have died in Laos 54 years ago. "They called us Omega because we were the last resort," Frank muttered. "We took missions that didn't officially exist. When things went wrong, there wasn't anyone coming for us." The beeping ahead grew faster. A door hissed open to a circular room lined with monitors. In the center, a steel table covered in files, a small generator humming weakly beside it. And then Frank froze. Pinned to the wall was a black and white photo. 12 men in jungle fatigues, all young, all smiling, and among them, his own face. But someone had drawn a red X across each man except one. His. Jason swallowed. "Sir, someone's been here recently." Before Frank could answer, a voice crackled through an old intercom speaker, low, hoarse, and chillingly familiar. "You took your time, Hawk 8. Frank's pulse jumped. "Mallory, You never could leave well enough alone, the voice said. Omega's not dead. You were just the one who walked away. Jason looked at him in confusion. Sir, who is that? Frank exhaled slowly, the weight of half a century settling on his shoulders. Someone who used to have my back. And now might have a rifle pointed at it. The door on the far side of the chamber opened. A figure stepped into the dim light, older, face scarred, wearing desert camo with no insignia. His right arm was missing below the elbow. Mallory. 50 years, he said, voice rough but steady. And they still sent you. Frank didn't raise his weapon. You sent the signal, Mallory nodded. Had to. Omega's data caches here. Everything they erased. The missions, the orders, the truth. Jason's eyes darted between them. Wait, you're saying this place holds classified records from wars that never made it into the history books, Mallory interrupted. We were the ghosts who fought them, Frank's voice hardened. Why now? Mallory stepped closer. Because the next generation's repeating our mistakes, and I need you to make sure they don't. The hum of old machinery filled the silence between them. That kind of heavy, electrical quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. Mallory leaned on the table, his one good hand resting beside a stack of yellowed folders. Each was marked with a red stamp, classified, eyes only. He opened one and slid it toward Frank. Inside were photos, black operations, men without names, coordinates from missions that officially never existed. And beneath them, one sheet of paper, a debrief signed by General Bennett. The same Bennett who had called Frank back. Frank's jaw tightened. You're saying the General's covering up Omega's history? Mallory's eyes hardened. I'm saying Omega never ended. They just buried it deeper. You were the only one who got out, Frank. You think that was luck? Jason looked from one man to the other. His voice unsteady. Sir, we should call this in. Let command... Frank shook his head. No, not yet. He turned back to Mallory. If this is true, then why send the beacon? You could have stayed gone. Mallory's lips trembled, not from fear, but age. Because I didn't want to die with a lie on my conscience. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small black drive, its casing engraved with the Omega insignia. This holds everything. Files, orders, the real reason Omega was created. But I can't release it. Frank frowned. Why not? Mallory stepped closer, his voice low. Because if it goes public, the names on that list, the ones who started this, they'll erase everyone tied to it. That means you, me, the Corps itself. Frank stared at the drive, the same way he used to stare down an impossible mission. Jason whispered, Sir, this could change everything. Frank closed his eyes for a moment. In that darkness, he saw it all again. The dust of old battlefields, the faces of men he'd lost, the orders that made no sense but had to be followed. When he opened them again, his decision was already made. He held out his hand. Give it to me. Mallory hesitated, then placed the drive in his palm. What will you do? Frank looked at the small blinking light on its side. What I was trained to do. Finish the mission. Jason blinked. Which mission, sir? Frank gave a half smile. The one that matters. He turned to leave, but Mallory's voice stopped him. They'll come for you. Frank glanced over his shoulder. They already have. Hours later, as dawn broke over the Nevada desert, a lone figure walked toward an airfield, the black drive clenched in his hand. The sun hit the horizon like a flare, painting the sky gold and crimson. For the first time in years, Frank Hayes felt peace. Not because the war was over, but because finally he knew what side he stood on. He looked back once, toward the desert that had buried too many secrets. Then he whispered to the wind, Omega, mission complete, and walked into the rising sun,